Here I have a button, and I like to make it so when you click the button, it spawns in a jump scare. Now, you may be aware that I did the same thing last year, but last year I did this with a camera and that ran into some graphical issues that I wasn't aware of. This one will be much more reliable, and I get to show you how to make an object stick to a player's face. So let me show you how to do that. Okay, so we're not actually going to be starting from scratch like some of my other tutorials. Instead, we already have an object that is roughly where the player's face will be. On this object, we have an audio source, which will be the sound that's playing, and we've set play on awake to be true, so the audio will play as soon as the object is enabled. Outside of that, we have the spider, and on that spider, it has an animation, which nicely makes it wiggle around on the player's face. Now, if you don't know how to make an animation in Unity, just search up a general Unity animation tutorial. It's completely the same inside and outside of VRChat. You could also look at my initial jump scare tutorial to see a very simple one there. Awesome, so now what we have here is we have an object, and it's a set distance away from the player's face so that it won't cause any clipping. You may need to tweak this later on, but it'll be really easy to do that in post. So, without further ado, let's start the coding part. So I'm going to come over here on the parent object, and I'm going to go add component, and I'm going to create an Udon behavior component. Now we need a script to go inside this Udon behavior component, so I'm going to come into the project window, I'm going to right click and go create, VRChat Udon graph program asset, and I'm going to call this player head follower. And then we're going to open up the Udon graph. Now, this will be very similar to my player follower script that I made in another video, but instead this time we're going to make it follow the player's head. However, we need to know what player we are following, so I'm going to come to the variables tab and I'm going to create a player API variable. I'm then going to call this target player. However, we do not need to make it public because we don't need to select it inside the inspector. So now we need to set this value to be the player that we want it to follow. So I'm going to drag and drop it while holding control to get a node that will set it. I'm then going to put a networking get local player node into that, so that whenever this node is called, it will set this variable to equal the local player. So now we can say when we want this to play, and we want this to play whenever the object is enabled, or turned on. So I'm going to use an event on enable node, and plug that right in. Awesome, so now whenever the object is turned on, it will set target player to be the local player. Now we just need to make the object follow the local player, and to do that we need to update its position every frame. Now we don't want to use update or late update, because they play before the head tracking data gets updated. So instead we're going to use event post late update, which gets called after all the IK tracking has been done. At least on desktop. I've had issues with Quest. Anyways, in order to set the position, we want to use a transform set position and rotation node, and this will set the position and rotation of our object. Now, this is one of the few times you don't have to plug anything in the instance slot, and that's because any transform or game objects will default to this object. So now all we need to do is set the position and rotation to be the same as our target player. So I'm going to grab a target player. I then want to grab its head tracking data with a player API get tracking data node. Make sure it's set to head, which is by default. Then we want to use a player API tracking data get position node and a player API tracking data get rotation node. And then we want to just drag and drop these into the position and rotation of our transform set position and rotation node. So now once every frame, it will set our position and rotation to be the same as the player's head's position and rotation. However, unlike our previous camera script, we do actually need to scale up and down the spider depending on how big or small the player is. So in order to scale an object, you want to use a transform set local scale node. For this, we'll need to scale it up, and for that, we want to use a vector-free 1 node, which is just a vector-free with 1, 1, 1, plugged into a vector-free multiply node, and then we need to multiply this vector-free by however big the player is, which we can do by getting the target player, and using a player API get avatar eye height as meters node, and plug that in. So now the scale of the object will be 1 times however big the player is. Now, there are actually multiple times we'll need to scale the player, so for this I'm going to use a custom event, and I'm just going to call this update object scale, and plug that in. So now when you say when do we need to update this scale? Well, the first thing is when we first turn on the object. So I'm going to use an Udon behavior send custom networked event, and I'm going to give the event name update object scale. However, if the player changes avatar midway, we also need to update its scale. So we can do that with an on avatar change node. We can check if it's the local player that changed their avatar using a player API equals node plugged into a branch node, and then get that to play a send custom networked event to update the object scale. However, there is one other case that the player's scale could change, and that is when they manually update the scale using the little gear wheel. So for that, we want to use an on avatar eye height change node and do basically the same thing we did for the avatar changed. And for that, I'm just going to duplicate with Control D. So now these are the 3 times you need to update the player's scale. I'm just going to put them in roughly the same location, so everything looks a bit neater. Awesome, so now with this, the object should follow the player's face. I'm just going to hit compile and come back into our scene. I'm going to select our object, and I'm going to give it our new script. Now there's no public variables needed, so we can just hit play and see that this works. And we can see that it played perfectly fine and gave me a nice little jump scare. Hooray! However, we'll notice that the spider is sticking around, so we need some way of making the spider go away. Now last time I did this by turning on and off an object, but this time I want to spawn in the spider and then despawn him when we're done using him. Now both ways are valid, however I want to show another node, so I'm going to instantiate it instead. So the first thing we need to do is destroy the object after it's been in the world for more than 3 seconds. So I'm going to come back to the Udon graph. Now because we want this delayed, I'm going to use a custom event. I'm going to call this destroy spider. I'm then going to use a Unity engine.object destroy node, and then give it this object to destroy. That node isn't particularly intuitive to find, but hey, that's the node you meant to use. Now we just need to tell it to play after 3 seconds, and for that I'm going to use a Udon behavior send custom event delayed seconds node. I'm going to plug it in, give it the event name destroy spider, and give it a 3-second delay. Awesome, so now this will destroy the object if it's been in the world for more than 3 seconds. Or at least if it's instantiated in. Last time I tested, this only works for instantiated objects. Every other object just kind of sticks around. Perhaps I've changed it since, but it doesn't really matter. Awesome, so now we just need a way of spawning the object. However, to spawn in an object, you need it to be a prefab. So I'm going to come back into the scene, I'm going to grab our object, and I'm going to drag and drop it into the project scene, and that's going to make it into a prefab. So now we can delete the original object, and we can just spawn it back in by just dragging and dropping our prefab into the world. Awesome, so now we need to do that via code. So in order to do that, I'm going to create a button, and so I'm going to right click and go 3D object cube. I'm going to call this spider spawner. I'm then going to reduce its size to be 0.15. I'm going to fly around to roughly where I want to go, Control Shift F to place it where I am, and then reset its rotation. Now I'm going to make this an is trigger because I don't really want players jumping on it. And then I'm going to go add component and create an Udon behavior component. Now we just need a script to go inside this Udon behavior component. So I'm going to go right click, create VRChat Udon graph program asset, and I'm going to call this spider spawner. And now I'm going to open up the Udon graph. Okay, so this script's going to be really simple. First, we just need to know the spider prefab. And to do that, we're going to come up to the variables tab, and we're just going to create a game object variable. And I'm just going to call this spider prefab. And then we're going to hit the drop down and make it public so we'll be able to see inside the inspector. Now I'm going to drag and drop that in. Now we want this to play whenever we click on the object, so I'm going to use an event interact node and plug that into an instantiate node. Now if we just join them all together, we can see that whenever we click on the object, it will tell VRChat to instantiate a spider prefab. And because we don't have to change its position or anything, this is all that we need. So I'm just going to hit compile and come back into our scene. I'm going to click on our spider spawner. I'm going to give it our new script, and then I'm going to drag and drop our player Jumpscare prefab into the spider prefab variable. Awesome, so now we can hit play and playtest this and make sure it all works. And now they're in the world, we can come over here, click the object, and we'll see the spider Jumpscare play for 3 seconds before disappearing. Awesome! Now you can also spam this and create a real mess of a thing. Anyways, I hope you found this helpful. Feel free to leave a like on the video if you liked it, leave a comment down below with any questions, and feel free to check out some of my other tutorials that I have on the channel. I also have links to my Patreon and Discord down below. But until next time, bye!